this tutorial we're going to be learning how to crochet one of these cute Christmas stockings. This is an easy pattern suitable for beginners as we're only going to be using single crochets and slip stitches. To make one of these stockings you're going to need 2 colours of yarn. The yarn that I'm using is called Drops Paris. It's 100% cotton Aran weight yarn, but you can use any yarn you like. With my Aran weight yarn I'm using a 4mm crochet hook. If you're using a different yarn, just go down 1 or 2 hook sizes from the recommended hook size for that yarn. You're also going to need a pair of scissors and a needle. Let's get crocheting. So this stocking has an unusual construction as we're actually going to be making a hexagon, folding it, seaming it along these sides and then crocheting around the top for the cuff. So this is a similar construction to a hexagon granny cardigan if you've made one of those before. So round 1 is actually here, and then that's round 2, and then round 3, and so on and so on. So just keep that in mind when we're crocheting this, that this won't look like a stocking until we seam it up. We're going to start our hexagon with a magic ring. You can use any method of magic ring for this, but I prefer the double magic ring method. So wrap the yarn around your first finger 3 times like this, and then place your middle finger next to your first finger to hold those wraps in place. Take your crochet hook and put your hook under those first 2 wraps, and then grab the 3rd wrap with your hook and pull it under the first 2 wraps. Now gently remove all of this yarn from your first finger. You should now have a ring made up of 2 strands of yarn. This is your magic ring that you're going to crochet into for round 1. For round 1, start with a chain of 1. This does not count as a stitch. Now work 6 single crochets into that magic ring. So we're going to be working around both strands of that magic ring. So I'm putting my hook in here underneath both of those strands to make the single crochet. So work 6 single crochet into that magic ring and then come back to this tutorial and I'll show you what we're doing for round 2. So I've made 6 single crochet into my magic ring. We now need to close this double magic ring, and this magic ring is closed a little bit differently from other methods of the magic ring. So take this yarn tail and give it just a gentle pull and watch these 2 strands of yarn. One of them will start to tighten and we need to grab it. So I'm going to give this a gentle pull, watch those 2 strands of yarn. Can you see that one moving just there? This one? We're going to grab it and pull it. And what this will do is this will tighten up that 2nd strand of yarn there. You can see this one moving in there. We're then going to have this big baggy loop here, and to get rid of it, grab your yarn tail and pull it. And that is the start of your stocking. To finish round 1, make a slip stitch into the top of the first stitch. We're now ready to move on to round 2. For round 2, make a chain of 1. This does not count as a stitch. We're now going to make 3 single crochets all into the top of this first stitch just here, and this can be quite fiddly and you might need to use a lot of force here, especially if you're a tight crocheter, but I promise you, you can fit 3 single crochets into that stitch. So my hook is going in there, just in the top of that first single crochet, and that's where I'm going to make 3 single crochets all into the top of that stitch. So you can see 1, 2, 3. Now work 3 single crochets into the top of every stitch as you work your way around. At the end of round 2 you should have made 18 single crochets. So pause this tutorial and I'll meet you back at the end of round 2 once you've worked those 3 single crochets into each stitch around. So this is what your crochet should look like at the end of round 2. I've made 18 single crochet stitches. Now this part is optional, but before we move up into round 3, I'm actually going to secure that tail that we left to begin with. For this pattern, I'll show you on my finished one. I haven't actually woven in any ends, and if you have a look in there, if there's enough light, you can see I've just left all of my ends loose in there. I've just given them a trim. So what we're going to do is secure our tail on the back. Because we've made a magic ring, you always need to do some extra securing with a magic ring or it will come open over time. So all I'm going to do is tie a simple knot with this end. So I'm going to thread it onto a needle. Okay, I've managed to thread that yarn tail onto this needle. So what I'm going to do here is, I hope you can see those loops, is I'm just going to pick one of these loops here and I'm going to put my needle just underneath that loop there and pull it through. And then before I pull that loop all the way through, I'm just going to loop my needle back through it, and that just gives that magic ring a little bit of extra security. And it doesn't matter if we've got knots on this because these are going to be on the inside of our stocking. So I'm then just going to trim that yarn tail just so it's not getting in the way too much. This is not how I usually fasten off ends if you're a beginner crocheter, but this is sort of a special case for when we're doing small decorative items like this. So to finish off round 2, we need to make a slip stitch into the top of that first stitch. So that is round 2 finished. We're now ready to move up into round 3. To start round 3, make a chain of 1. So in this round, we're going to be turning this circle into a hexagon. So we're going to have some corner stitches and some sort of side stitches. So we're going to start with 1 single crochet back into that same stitch that we did the slip stitch to join. So we're just making 1 single crochet into this stitch. Ooh. There's my 1 single crochet. And then if we have a look at this crochet, I'll zoom in a little bit for you. So we've just made a single crochet into the first single crochet of a 3 single crochet group here. And the next stitch is actually our corner stitch. So what we're going to do into that corner stitch is work 3 single crochets. So 1, 2, 3. Now work a single crochet into the next 2 stitches. 1, 2. We're now at that middle single crochet of a 3 single crochet group, so we're going to make 3 single crochets into it. We're going to repeat this all the way around the hexagon, working a single crochet into the next 2 stitches, and then 3 single crochets into the next stitch. So continue this around until the end of the round and I'll meet you back there. So here I am almost at the end of round 3 and I've just worked my 3 single crochet group and I've got 1 stitch left unworked, so I'm going to work 1 single crochet into it. At the end of this round you should have 30 stitches. To finish off round 3, slip stitch into the top of the first stitch. So as you can see, especially if I sort of bring it up to the front, is our hexagon is not laying quite flat. It's kind of curling a little bit at the sides, and this is going to get more and more pronounced the more rounds we put onto our stocking. Don't worry about it. This hexagon is not supposed to lie flat. So we're now ready to start the next round, and for the next 3 rounds they're going to be quite similar to round 3 in that we're going to be having these corners of 3 single crochets with 1 single crochet in all of the stitches between those corners. I will show you what each of those rounds looks like, but if you're a confident crocheter, go ahead and make a hexagon that's 6 rounds. So for round 4, make a chain of 1. This does not count as a stitch. Then work a single crochet back into that same stitch we slip stitched to join. Then work a single crochet into the next stitch. The next stitch should now be the middle single crochet of that group of 3 single crochets in the corner. So work 3 single crochets into it. Now work a single crochet into the next 4 stitches. 1, 2, 3, 4. You should now again be at that middle single crochet of the 3 single crochet corner group from the last round. So work 3 single crochets into that stitch to form the corner. Now repeat these steps around all 6 sides of your hexagon, working 4 single crochets along the side of the hexagon and then corners of 3 single crochets all into the same group, and I'll meet you back at the end of the round. So this is what your hexagon should look like at the end of the round. You should have a total of 42 single crochet in round 4. And you should have just made a single crochet into each of the last 2 stitches after a corner group. To finish off round 4, slip stitch into the top of the first stitch. We're now ready for round 5. For round 5, work a chain of 1. This does not count as a stitch. Then work a single crochet back into that same stitch. Single crochet into each of the next 2 stitches. You should now be at a corner stitch, so work 3 single crochets into it. Now work a single crochet into each of the next 6 stitches. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. You should now be at a corner stitch, so work 3 single crochets into it. Continue working like this around your hexagon, working 1 single crochet into each of the 6 stitches along the sides of the hexagon, and then your corner group of 3 single crochets, and I'll meet you back at the end of this round. This is what your hexagon should look like at the end of round 5. I've just done 1, 2, 3 single crochets after one of those corner groups. You should have a total of 54 single crochets in round 5. And as you can see, that ruffle where the hexagon is not laying flat is getting quite pronounced now. Again, this is okay, it's supposed to happen. To finish off round 5, work a slip stitch into the top of the first stitch of the round. We're now ready for round 6. To start round 6, work a chain of 1. This does not count as a stitch. Now work a single crochet back into that same stitch. Work a single crochet into each of the next 3 stitches. 1, 2, 3. We should now be at one of those corner stitches. Work a group of 3 single crochets into it. So that's the corner group made. Now work a single crochet into each of the next 8 stitches. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Now work a corner group of 3 single crochets into the next stitch and repeat those steps all the way around your hexagon, working those corner groups of 3 single crochets all into the same stitch and then a single crochet into each of the 8 stitches between those corner groups. I'll meet you back at the end of the round. So this is what your very wibbly hexagon should be looking like at the end of round 6. You should have made 66 single crochet stitches, and as before, finish off the round with a slip stitch into the top of the first stitch. So we've now finished crocheting the hexagon, and the next step is to join it into a stocking. So do not fasten off or lose this loop here, but pull it out a little bit just so we can play around with this hexagon a bit. But we're not going to be cutting our yarn because we're going to be continuing with this yarn tail to seam the stocking. So now it's time for the magic bit, which is where we turn this wibbly wobbly hexagon into a stocking just by folding it in a particular way. So we're going to start our fold where we've got this loop of yarn here, and what we're going to do is we're actually going to fold this side of the hexagon in half like this, so bringing those two corners together and then following down, and just like that we've got that stocking shape. So that's kind of how we make that stocking shape. So pop that loop back on your hook, and now it's time to do that slip stitch join. So if I just show you where we're going to be putting our hook for this first join with a needle, just so it's a little bit easier for you to see. So this join is done in the back loops of these two sides of the hexagon. So we're going to be putting our hook underneath the back loop of this first single crochet after this slip stitch here. So we're going to be putting our hook underneath this loop here, and then under the back loop of this other stitch, the other side of that slip stitch, so under that loop there. So that is where you need to put your crochet hook to make your first slip stitch, and this can be a little bit fiddly. So if you can see here, we've got this yarn tail here, so what we're actually going to do when we make this slip stitch is make sure this yarn tail is actually folded over there just while we put our hook into this first stitch, just to make sure that yarn tail is not on the inside of our stocking, otherwise you're going to struggle with this join. So yeah, that yarn tail over here, and then we're going to put our hook underneath that loop that I showed you earlier with that hook. So we're going under, because this crochet is so tight and the yarn is so stiff it's hard to get it in. There we go, so we're going under that loop there. So if you can see here, it's the back loop of that stitch to the side of that slip stitch there, and then we're going to put our hook under that loop there, so the back loop of this stitch here, and that's where we're going to make our first slip stitch. After we've done this first slip stitch, it gets a lot easier. So yarn over and pull through all three of those loops on the hook, so we're pulling through both of those back loops and through the loop on the hook to make that slip stitch. So now that first slip stitch is out of the way, it's a lot easier from now on. So what we're going to do is we're going to join along this side, these two sides and these two sides, leaving this side up here open for the top of the hexagon. So we're going to continuing slip stitching around here. So I will show you what that looks like. So we're going through the back loop of the next stitch here. So in there, in that back loop again. And then we're going to grab the back loop of this back stitch as well. It might be easy for me to show you it from the top there. Then make a slip stitch, and again in the next stitch go underneath the back loop of that next stitch and the back loop of the stitch at the back, and you're going to repeat this along those sides of the hexagons that I showed you. So we're going to continue doing these slip stitches all the way along, every stitch all the way along here and all the way along here, and then stop when you get to this corner here and come back to this tutorial. So I've worked my slip stitch join along these sort of three sides of the hexagon, and if we have a look up here, I've just stopped before this corner group here, and then it's the equivalent corner group on the back of those 3 single crochet stitches, and we're going to work a slip stitch join into the first 2 single crochets only of that 3 single crochet group. So we're going to do a slip stitch in that first stitch, and then that final slip stitch is in that corner single crochet there. So that's the join finish. We're now going to move on to the leg and cuff of the stocking. So to work the leg of the stocking, we're going to be working in rounds like this, building up the stocking, and this is actually 5 rounds. I've done 3 rounds of the colour and then 2 rounds of the off-white colour, but you can change this up if you want to. So to work this first round of the leg, start with a chain of 1. This does not count as a stitch. We're now going to work a single crochet under both loops of that second single crochet of that corner group. So we've already done a slip stitch in the back loop of it. We're now going to do a single crochet under both loops. My hook is going to go under those 2 loops just there to make this first single crochet. So there's my single crochet worked into that stitch. Now work 1 single crochet into each stitch around until you end up at the back at sort of where we ended this slip stitch and started this round, so in this stitch here. So I'll meet you back around here once you've worked 1 single crochet into every stitch all the way around the top of the stocking. So I've worked those single crochets around the top of the stocking, and I've just worked a single crochet into the first single crochet of this corner group here, and we're going to do exactly what we did round here and work a single crochet into the next stitch, which is the corner stitch that's already got a slip stitch here into the back loop, but we're going to go under both loops here. So we're going under those 2 loops just there to make that final single crochet of the round. So at the end of this round you should have made 12 single crochets around the top of this stocking. Slip stitch into the first stitch to join that round. We're now going to work 2 more rounds of just plain single crochet with this dark green colour. So chain 1, that does not count as a stitch, work a single crochet back into that same stitch, and then work 1 single crochet around each stitch, slip stitch to join, chain 1, and repeat that again until we've worked 3 total rounds of single crochet for this leg. So I'll meet you back in 2 rounds time once I've worked those 2 more rounds of single crochet. So I finished working those rounds of single crochet and I'm now ready to change colour for the cuff. I have not done my slip stitch at the end of the round because we're going to change colour during this slip stitch. So put your hook into that first stitch that you would normally do for a slip stitch, but we're not going to do our yarn over and pull through with the green yarn. We're actually going to do it with our contrast colour. I'm using this off-white colour. And before we do this, we're actually going to leave a very long yarn tail because we're actually going to be using this yarn tail to embroider on the letter on the stocking. You can skip this and leave a normal yarn end if you don't want to embroider this letter at the end. And yes, I am going to be showing you how to do this embroidery. So yeah, leave a very long yarn end. I'm leaving probably about 40 centimeters here, I'd say. So what I've done here is I've wrapped the yarn around my hook as if I was just sort of doing a yarn over here. I'm going to pull that loop through that stitch to finish off that slip stitch there. So you can see we've changed colour. And we've now got this green yarn tail. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to trim my end. Again, we're not going to be weaving this end in like we do with normal crochet. We're going to be tying a knot. And this time I'm going to tie my knot between my green tail and my very long off-white tail here. So I'm just going to tie a simple square knot. So I'm going to do 1 square knot and then a second square knot and pull that nice and tight. Then I'm going to trim this yarn tail, the green one only, not the white one, the green one. And then I can tuck that down inside my stocking so it's out the way and no one ever knows it's there and I don't have to bother weaving in any ends. Okay, we have got this very long yarn tail that might get in the way as well, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to wrap this around my finger and tuck it into our stocking as well so it's there ready for when I need it later for the embroidery. So now we've secured those tails, we're ready for the next round, and this round is another round of just plain single crochet. We're going to do 2 rounds in fact of plain single crochet in this off-white coloured yarn. So start with a chain of 1, that doesn't count as a stitch, work a single crochet back into that same stitch and then work a single crochet all the way around. So work 2 rounds of single crochet with this off-white yarn and then I'll meet you back at the end of that second round and I'll show you how we create this loop of yarn so that you can hang your stocking up on your tree. So I've worked those 2 rounds with the off-white colour and I've just done my slip stitch to join. And now to create that hanging loop, cut your tail a little bit over twice the length you want that loop to be. So I'm going to cut, oh, I don't know how long that is, about 20-25 centimetres. I'm not very good at estimating lengths, but I'm going to cut about that much yarn. And then I'm going to thread that yarn. Oh no, I'm not. I'm going to pull that loop through to secure, and then I'm going to give this a nice tug just to tighten it off. Then I'm going to thread the yarn tail onto my needle. And then what we're going to do is we're going to create that loop that we want for hanging, and then I'm going to take a stitch here. It doesn't really matter where you put your needle here. I'm going to take a stitch, make that loop the length that I want it to be because we're about to knot it in place. And then what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to tie a square knot here between this yarn tail and that strand we've just created here. So we're going to try a knot again. So I'm going to leave it attached to the needle because we're actually going to need the needle again in a second. So there is one part of the square knot and then a second one, just a double knot, normal double knot. There we go. So now that is nice and secure, and it's a little bit shorter than my red one, but never mind. And then to hide this end, we're not going to bother cutting it or weaving it in. What I'm going to do is I'm going to put my needle in that stitch there and pull that tail through. There we go. And then work it down the back. It's kind of hard to show you here because we're going inside the hexagon. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to work it down the back of a few of these stitches, just so that then the tail's pointing inside the stocking, so it's not popping out the top, because if I just left it here like this or tried to tuck it in, it might pop out the top. So I'm just going to run it underneath those threads there at the back of the stitch there, then take tail off my needle, and now I can tuck it in, although I might give it a little trim first, and then tuck it into my stocking. And now it's time to embroider the letter on the front. So we're now ready to embroider our letter on, and we're going to be doing that with that tail of yarn we tucked into our stocking earlier. And the embroidery stitch we're going to use is called backstitch. I'm by no means a really good embroiderer. I have very basic embroidery skills, so I will show you what a backstitch looks like. If you've got a more complicated letter that has curves in it, like an S or a P or an R, you might struggle with this step and it might look a little bit uneven, but I'm doing these for me and my partner, so I need an L on this one. So that's a nice easy letter to show you how to do it. So I'm going to hunt around for that really long tail that's inside. There we are. So there's that long tail from earlier. I'm going to thread that on my needle. Okay, so first we need to decide where our letter's going to be, and I'm going to try and do it in the same place that I did this E. So I did the E, looks like about, that's where the top corner of that E is. So that's where the top of my L needs to be. But I'm not going to go in there because we're going to be doing backstitch. So I'm actually going to be putting my needle in from the back and coming out in this spot here. So my needle's going inside. I can't show you what I'm doing inside of the stocking, but all I'm doing is poking it through the fabric. So I'm going in there, and I'm trying to come up sort of where I would be crocheting in that stitch. That's where my needle's coming up. There we go. And then to do backstitch, we're going to go up into that top corner of the L, and I'm going to come in there, and I'm making sure I'm only going through the top side of the stocking, so I'm not coming out the back here. I'm coming out in on the inside that I can't show you, and I'm going to bring my needle up in the next space down here, and with it's called backstitch because our stitches are going in a backwards direction. And then we're going to do the same again. So I'm going into that space here. Ooh, I'm off the screen a little bit. So I'm going into this space here and coming down at the end of where I want the next backstitch to be. So I'm going in there and coming out about here. Once we get to these corner spaces, you're kind of not in those sort of crocheted bits anymore. the spaces between the stitches, I mean. Okay, I've pulled it through and there is my back stitch there. I'm having a bit of an issue with my needle, but you can see the effect there. And then we're just going to back stitch again down to there. Was that too small? That's about right, I think. Go up there. So I'm doing that back stitch again. And then I'll show you how I turn the corner. Because we're stitching into crochet, sometimes these stitches can be a bit wonky, you can see. Mine's a little bit wonky there, but it's handmade object, I just go with the wonk. So to turn the corner, I'm not going to obviously come down here, because what I need to do here is do this, the sort of the other part of the L here. I'm going in here. You can tell that I'm not very comfortable teaching embroidery. It's not a great skill that I have. So I'm coming in there and up out there, so that I can do my back stitch along here. So now I'm going to work along here and do 3 more back stitches to finish off this L. So now I'm going to do my final back stitch, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to go in there, and then on the inside, I'm not going to be able to show you because it's so far down, I'm going to grab a thread, knot it, trim my end and tuck it inside, and that will be the stockings finished. And here is my finished stocking. I hope you've enjoyed this tutorial, and I am making some more crochet tutorials for Christmas decorations. Once they're available, I'll link them up on the screen here, but if they're not available yet, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss them once they go live. See you next time.